I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of unspoken betrayals. The conference room was already warm with anticipation when the team gathered around the long table. The client had flown in for this exclusive presentation, and every detail had been prepared for weeks. He stood near the screen, hands steady, knowing that this prototype represented years of patient work. He had refined it quietly, avoiding office politics, believing that results would speak louder than any title. When the cloth was lifted and the device appeared, a brief silence filled the room, the kind that usually announces something memorable. He began to explain the mechanics, guiding the client through the reasoning behind each choice. Engineers nodded. The client leaned forward with growing interest. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe that this day might change everything. Then the door opened behind him and the atmosphere shifted. His wife, the CEO, walked in with the kind of authority that silences even the air. She did not greet the visitors. She did not acknowledge the work. She looked directly at the prototype with visible irritation. Before anyone could stop her, she stepped closer and pushed the device off the table. It fell with a blunt sound that echoed across the room. She spoke loudly, calling the work a waste of company resources. She accused him of slowing down progress. She told the client the company would start over with a team capable of producing something serious. The engineers stared at their hands. The manager swallowed hard. No one dared to intervene. He stood still, watching the pieces of his creation scatter across the floor. The client's expression moved from confusion to disbelief. The room had become a stage, and the scene unfolding was not a disagreement, but a dismantling. She treated him as if he were invisible, someone who could be dismissed without consequence. The silence around her was heavy, yet she seemed comfortable inside it, certain of her power. The client shifted in her seat, studying him, not the CEO. Something in her eyes suggested she had witnessed enough boardrooms to recognize when authority crossed into cruelty. He breathed slowly, refusing to let anger guide him. In that moment, while the room stood frozen, he understood something sharper than any insult. The humiliation had not happened by accident. It had been prepared long before the prototype ever touched the table. Long before the meeting that ended in silence, the prototype lived in a hidden corner of his life. It began as an idea he carried home each evening after everyone else had left the office. While the building settled into darkness, he stayed behind, adjusting circuits, testing sensors, and rewriting small pieces of code that only he truly understood. Most nights he returned home long after the city changed its rhythm. He never complained because he believed in what he was building. It was not ambition pushing him. It was responsibility. He knew the client's complaints better than management did. Their production lines stalled each quarter. Their workers struggled with outdated processes. Their budget bled money through inefficiency. Instead of creating another flashy presentation for executives, he studied the problem quietly until he could map every weakness. The prototype was designed to fix that very issue. It was simple, elegant, and realistic. It did not require a major investment. It simply required someone who cared enough to think beyond appearances. He tested the device repeatedly, even risking small malfunctions that could have drawn criticism. Each failure brought him closer to something that truly worked. He brought in trusted technicians after hours and asked for honest feedback. He listened more than he talked. Many nights, he left the building carrying the weight of both exhaustion and hope. When the prototype finally achieved the performance he envisioned, he kept it private. He wanted the client to see it before anyone else. It felt right to let the people who suffered the real problem witness the real solution first. This context was invisible in the conference room. His efforts did not match the CEO's appetite for control. Her company valued image more than substance. The quieter he worked, the more she seemed threatened by the outcome she could not claim entirely as her own. Her reaction in front of the client carried a sharpness that came from something deeper than professional disagreement. It carried fear. As he stood in the wreckage of the device, he recalled every night spent perfecting it. The room believed they had witnessed a moment of failure. He knew better. Something valuable had been destroyed, but not by accident. She believed she had ended a project. She had no idea what she had actually provoked. The room remained motionless after the prototype hit the floor. No one rushed to pick it up. No one tried to justify what had just happened. The CEO stood confidently at the head of the table, satisfied with her display of authority. She believed silence meant agreement. She believed her position guaranteed obedience. Not a single member of the team challenged her. The manager kept his eyes fixed on the wall, as if acknowledging the scene would endanger his position. Everyone waited for the client to accept the explanation and move on. He did not confront her. He did not replay the humiliation or demand recognition. Instead, he set clear boundaries. He explained calmly that he would attend the meeting alone, as requested. He reminded her that the client valued clarity and that imposing additional voices could damage the process. His tone remained steady, without anger or triumph. It was not a performance. It was a declaration of independence that did not require noise. The CEO paused, realizing her authority no longer guaranteed access. She attempted one final appeal, suggesting they present a united front. He simply thanked her for understanding and walked out, leaving her in a silence she had never experienced in her own office. Later that afternoon, his phone rang. The client confirmed the project would continue. She wanted his design, his leadership, his terms. For the first time, everything moved forward because of him, not despite him. In the days that followed, the office returned to its usual rhythm, yet nothing truly felt the same. Conversations paused when he passed by. Meetings shifted subtly to include him rather than overlook him. The client's decision had rippled through the hierarchy with quiet force, exposing who had relied on titles and who had relied on competence. He moved through the space without changing his demeanor. There was no celebration, no prideful retelling of events, only a steady continuation of the work he had always done. At home, the silence between him and his wife carried a different weight. She attempted to resume their routines, hoping the professional world would reset itself, but he had already seen what stood behind her actions. Her outburst in front of the client was not a mistake. It had revealed a long pattern of control disguised as leadership. He understood now that her view of him had shaped decisions he once believed were impartial. He did not raise the subject. He did not accuse her. He simply stopped letting her words define his value. As the project moved forward, he met with the client regularly. Their conversations focused on solutions, practical steps, and long-term strategies. For the first time, his knowledge guided the direction of an entire contract. He treated each meeting with the professionalism that had always been part of him, long before anyone recognized it. The client respected his calm approach and openly acknowledged that the project succeeded because he stayed true to his discipline rather than react emotionally. The office watched the transformation with quiet astonishment. The manager, once a gatekeeper of opportunities, now deferred to his judgment. The CEO maintained her composure, but her certainty had faded. She had built authority on the assumption that silence reflected weakness. Now she faced the truth that silence can also reveal strength she never accounted for. He did not seek victory. He sought clarity. The experience taught him that respect cannot be demanded through position or fear. It must be earned through conduct. And real confidence does not shout when challenged. It holds steady. The lesson was simple and mature. People who humiliate you in public never expect you to outgrow their control until you do. The client did not. She sat perfectly still, hands folded, studying the faces around her with a calm that carried weight. Years of negotiating with difficult partners had taught her more about character than any resume ever could. She observed who shrank into their chairs and who looked away. Most importantly, she observed him. He had not raised his voice. He had not tried to defend himself or justify the work. He simply stood quietly, the calmest person in a room filled with nervous restraint. This calm unsettled the CEO. Control usually returned to her quickly after such moments. Yet the client's silence stretched longer than expected. The CEO tried to redirect attention with a long explanation about restructuring, future planning, and new strategies. Her words filled the space, but none of them answered the unspoken question lingering in the client's mind. The client turned her gaze back to the broken prototype on the floor. She replayed the moment in her head. She remembered the clarity with which he had explained the design before the interruption. She remembered the precision of his answers and the honesty in his tone. She realized that what she had seen had not been failure. It had been sabotage, and sabotage always reveals more about the saboteur than the target. The manager finally attempted a smile, hoping to soften the tension, but the client ignored him. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and looked directly at the man who had been humiliated minutes earlier. Her eyes lingered with curiosity. She was measuring him, not his title. When she finally spoke, her voice cut through the room like a blade. She did not address the CEO. She did not ask about restructuring. She asked him one simple question that changed everything. Could he meet her privately after this meeting? The silence after the client's request hung in the air, heavy and disorienting. Everyone expected the CEO to regain control, yet she hesitated. Her authority, usually unquestioned, met resistance for the first time. The team shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether they should remain seated or prepare to leave. The manager forced a smile that faded almost immediately. The meeting felt unfinished, suspended between protocol and something more revealing. Near the end of the table sat a consultant invited to give technical insight. He had observed the entire scene without speaking. He had taken notes, analyzed the interactions, and quietly evaluated every participant. When he finally lifted his eyes, he seemed ready to return to neutrality, but something in the client's posture encouraged him to speak. His voice was calm and almost gentle. He remarked that the device had shown potential before the interruption. He stated that the explanation offered by the engineer was clear and promising. Then he added one sentence that shifted the atmosphere completely. He said that prototypes are rarely destroyed unless they threaten someone's narrative. The words settled across the table like dust after an explosion. There was no accusation. There was simply a truth that no one dared articulate before. The client turned sharply toward him. The sentence gave shape to her unspoken thoughts. She replayed the presentation in her mind and reconsidered the intention behind the outburst. She looked at the broken device again and saw not failure but interruption. Her gaze moved to the engineer, steady and reflective, standing quietly at the edge of the room. She recognized a professionalism that contrasted sharply with the chaos she had witnessed. The CEO attempted to respond, but her voice carried a strain she could not hide. She insisted that the company needed higher standards and that the destruction of the prototype was a necessary gesture. Yet every word seemed to weaken her position rather than strengthen it. Authority did not collapse with a shout. It dissolved under observation. The client exhaled slowly, making her decision. She rose from her seat and walked toward the engineer. Her tone was calm, confident, and decisive. She asked him directly for his contact information, repeating that she wanted to continue the discussion privately. The room understood instantly. The balance of power had shifted, and nothing would return to the way it was. The door had barely closed behind the client when the atmosphere inside the office shifted again. What had been silent tension during the meeting turned into urgent whispers once the corridor emptied. The CEO retreated to her office, followed by the manager who moved quickly, already aware that the situation required immediate containment. Within minutes, the team received a series of hurried emails about expectations, communication errors, and future presentations. Every message seemed to rewrite pieces of the meeting that had just occurred, as if the narrative could be repaired before the client returned to her headquarters. Phone calls began soon after. The CEO tried to reach the client directly, leaving messages about strategic misunderstandings and internal miscommunications. She prepared a long explanation blaming time pressure and incomplete briefs. Her words carried nervous energy. The calm confidence she displayed in the meeting had dissolved into an urgent attempt to regain control. Meanwhile, the manager approached him quietly, speaking in a rehearsed tone about the importance of presenting a unified story. He recommended avoiding mention of the prototype incident. He insisted that the future of the department depended on cooperation. He listened without interrupting. He knew these requests were not about protecting the team. They were about protecting reputations. He did not agree or disagree. He simply acknowledged the conversation and returned to his desk. The manager took his silence as compliance, unaware that the decision no longer belonged to anyone in that office. The client had seen everything she needed to see. Her judgment had already begun to form. Later in the afternoon, his phone vibrated. It was the client's assistant requesting a private meeting for the following morning. The message was short and direct. It did not mention the CEO. It did not include the manager or anyone from the executive team. It asked only for him and the consultant who had spoken during the meeting. The assistant added that the client wanted to review a possible partnership based on the concept he had presented before the interruption. The manager noticed the message on his screen and felt a cold weight settle in his chest. Control was shifting to a place he could not reach. Decisions were being made behind closed doors, and for the first time, the CEO was not invited to the table. The shift became visible the next morning. Word had spread through the office that the client had requested a private meeting without the CEO. Rumors moved quickly, but no one understood the full picture yet. When he entered the building, the same manager who once dismissed him with a casual smile was waiting near the elevator. His tone had changed. He now spoke with urgent politeness, offering assistance, advice, and apologies wrapped in professional language. The man who once laughed quietly behind meetings now tried to walk beside him as if they had always shared respect. He listened without responding. The manager's voice trembled slightly, aware that influence was no longer something he could hide behind. Every step revealed the new imbalance. The manager no longer guided conversations. He followed them. His attempts to position himself as an ally grew desperate, yet he avoided mentioning the incident with the prototype, fearing it would expose his earlier complicity. Meanwhile, the CEO remained in her office preparing a revised presentation. She sent him an invitation to join her for a quick alignment session. Her tone, once sharp and commanding, sounded strangely diplomatic. She attempted to negotiate her presence in the meeting with the client, insisting that the situation had been a misunderstanding. She offered to highlight his contribution publicly and acknowledged his dedication. Every sentence she spoke was carefully arranged to sound cooperative.